Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Chip Conley. He is the author of Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. Also the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. We dove into many details about both of those in the first part. If you missed that one, just go back to the last episode. You can pick that up where it got started, where we got rolling, where we were talking about all these things about midlife and how it's not a crisis, how it's the time of opportunity, how you can shift that. In this second part, I'm going to start about 20 seconds prior to where we wrapped up last time, just to give you context. We were coming out of a conversation about author that he had quoted and we've had on the podcast, Bruce Feiler, where he says there's that time in life where it's time once more to utter the most spellbinding, life-affirming words we can utter. The words that suggest a story is coming, maybe even a fairy tale. And those words are once upon a time. So we pick up there talking about how do you make that transition when you're ready to rewrite your story, when you're ready to edit your story. How do you get that ball rolling? And I wanted to give you kind of the back end of what he had begun talking about in our last episode, and then we'll roll through it from there. If you're listening to this and you're not 50, 60, 70 years old, and you're saying, well, I don't know if it's applicable. We get into that. You'll hear me actually kind of joke with him that maybe his next book, his next pursuit is setting the stage, how to help those in their 20s, 30s, and 40s unlock opportunities that might help lead into a more effective midlife. And so if that's you, I think you can garner some value there as well. We cover so many things in this second part. I think I kind of like the second part even better than the first. But irregardless, I hope you enjoy it. If this is your first time with us, I'm Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching. It is a privilege to have you here. Thank you for spending a little of your week with us here on the Coaching Lab podcast, and always look forward to this time together. If you have any questions about coaching or integrating coaching into your specific either clinical practice or starting a new career path, or maybe you want to do this on the side as something you're doing as you're moving through your phase of life right now, our next cohort for the nationally board certified health and wellness coaching certification is kicking off here relatively soon. We do 4 a year. So regardless of where you're listening to this, if it's an interest, we're happy to talk that through with you. Reach out anytime. Results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. That's results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We're not going to set you up with a salesperson. We will either have literally myself, Susanna, or one of our long-standing mentor coaches reach out to you and talk through, does this make sense? Where does it fit? How does it all come together? All those kinds of things. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. The website, if you want to tap into some of those resources or take a pre-peek at that, is catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now let's jump in and continue our conversation with Chip Conley on the latest episode of the Coaching Lab podcast.
So long story short is it's learning how to find the ritual that says that's the end of that phase. And this is an identity that's a raincoat that I'm ready to take off, and I'm ready to try something new. But that requires moving from a fixed to a growth mindset. And that means being open to being a beginner and not very good at something. And so a lot of it comes back to mindset. Mindset management is, when someone comes to an MEA program at graduation, they get a piece of art that's a certificate in mindset management. And so for a lot of people, they've never really thought about mindset, nor the idea that, wow, having a fixed mindset and only playing games that I can win means that my life gets smaller and smaller. My sandbox gets smaller. So it's really essential for us to help people to see they have more options than they thought they did. Just like that litigator who became a pastry chef.
Love it. Love it. How do we balance the two seemingly distinct elements of contentment with ascendance, the upward aim, the moving forward, the growth that you're talking about, combined with this idea of contentment? How do those two merge, if you will?
So contentment, is an interesting thing. When you're in your 20s, you don't really necessarily want to be content.
Exactly. Let's go.
Yeah. No, you're pursuing happiness. The pursuit of happiness is part of it. It's, Declaration of Independence. But when you get to an older age, contentment actually can feel really comfortable, partly because it means that you're content with who you are and you know what you like. And contentment means that everything's sort of good. And it means that you're not caring so much what other people think about you. And you're sort of gotten to a place where you've created a groove. Now, the problem with that is a groove can also be a rut, and it can be a hole. And so ascendancy, the idea of finding flow, is not at odds with contentment, but it does require you to break out of comfort. Because Holly Csikszentmihalyi, who popularized the idea of flow and was a friend of mine and someone who taught me, he was a mentor of mine, taught me that flow is really not just like being in the zone. It is when challenge and skill are perfectly matched. Right. And the only way that works over time is for you to up the challenge, because your skill is going to grow. So challenge, it's like a stair step: challenge, skill, challenge, skill. So ascendancy is going up that stair step of challenge, skill. What I'll say is that part of the reason I think that contentment can work with flow is because from a stable base, you can try things that have that challenge, skill, alchemy that allow you to give it the proper investment to try to find flow. Now, not always, like I tried learning how to surf, and I did it okay. I wasn't great. And then at some point I realized, wow, the challenge, skill, flow on this one is too hard for me. And so once a year now I surf. But back at 57, when I was starting to learn, I was doing it at least every other week. I was going out for a couple hours of surfing. But I had to give it the time. And the problem with, if you're not in a state of contentment with trying to go into flow, is it's a distracted, it can be very distracted. If you're
performing.
You're performing, and if you're performing, you're going to be self-critical, and part of the ability to get into flow is to not really care how it looks to other people or how good you are. You just do it because you want to actually, feel like you want to try to get better at it. And so often contentment can lead to apathy. And apathy can mean that you aren't willing to aspire. So, instead, I would say contentment is a beautiful baseline from which flow and aspiration can grow.
Let's talk to our listeners who are saying, this is great, or I'm coaching people in this phase, so this is super helpful. But what about me? Like, for the folks in their 30s, 40s, it seems like there are a lot of steps, and maybe here's your next book. There are a lot of steps that they can be stepping into, activating, trying, preparing for in the 30s and 40s that will then help them in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Are there things that you would recommend for our listeners who are in their 30s and 40s that will allow that transition to be more effective?
Well, first of all, let me say that one of the big surprises after we created Modern Elder Academy, MEA, was that a large percentage of the people who came were millennials. Mm. Who would have expected millennials to come to a place with elder in the name? But it's for a lot of people, a lot of younger people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they really wanted to learn how to build wisdom. So I would say, wisdom is something you take with you for a lifetime. The earlier you learn it, the longer it has value to you. So one of the things I started doing when I was 28 years old, is every weekend I would sit down with my wisdom book. Oh my God, I've got it here somewhere. Oh, got it. It's actually, here it is. It's the base of this is my wisdom book. My wisdom book from 1990. And I started a practice where every weekend I sat down and I asked myself the question, what were my biggest lessons of this week? And how will they serve me in the future? So the value in doing that is you are accelerating the metabolization of your life experience and turning it into wisdom. because our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. And a great coach does this. A great coach helps a client understand what they learned from that experience. So I would say that's one key thing that a younger person or a person in their 30s or 40s, 20s, 30s or 40s could do. Another thing is to understand, how influenced in your career, in your life path, are you based upon someone else's script? And the earlier, and this is, I think that what's beautiful about younger generations today is they are less inclined to buy into the traditional three-stage life of you learn, then you earn, then you retire or adjourn. And, you see lots of young people saying they want to do, make their money and then retire early. Or you see people take a year-long gap year in their 30s before they have kids. Or you see lots more nonlinear paths. And that's helpful because actually being nonlinear allows you to break out of the herd mentality of I've got to do what everybody else is doing. And for a lot of people, they wake up at 50, and you sort of alluded to this earlier, and they're like, whose life is this? It's like that, Talking Heads song,
that's not my, yeah.
So you get to a place where you say, this isn't for me. And so asking those questions earlier is really important. And yeah, I would say what else? I would say, I think developing a relationship with someone who's older that's got a mutual mentorship element to it would be valuable. One of my biggest lessons at Airbnb, I had over 100 mentees during my 7.5 years there, was if I had a mentee, I was going to learn as much from the mentee as they were going to learn. And so how do we create these cross-generational mentorship relationships that are not purely old teaching young or young teaching old, but two people teaching each other across generations, because one person knows this and the other person knows that, and they're going to teach it to each other. And so learning how to seek out people that you can learn from and then know that they probably could learn from you, that's something you can do, in early adulthood as well.
Well, and I loved your wording there. The mutual mentorship is the phrase I wrote down. One of the things I try to do, and you and I are, again, similar ages, you're 5 years older, but I try to spend time not just with our kids, but people in their same age group, and then folks that are peers, and then folks that are older, folks in their 80s, late 70s, because there's so much value in that mutual. Hopefully they're getting something out of it too, but there's so much value in not just saying, well, Chip and I are going to hang out together because we'll get this figured out, we're peers, but drawing from, contributing to, across that. So wonderful phrase. You you cracked me up on this one. You note the value of realizing nobody cares in terms of our own failings. Like nobody's paying attention.
Other than our mother.
Maybe so. And yet all of us, and you make a point of this in your book, we spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure that out. Any suggestions for turning the corner with that misperception? I'm an endurance athlete, so I used to think it mattered, and I finally realized, no one cares, including my wife, kids. The only person maybe is the guy behind me, and the guy in front of me cares how I finished. Otherwise, it's just for me. I'm not a professional. I don't earn a living doing this. But how do folks tap into that realization in life? Because you're exactly right.
One of the things that's helpful is asking the question, in the course of my life, how important is this truly? And then ... truly, because when we're in the middle of it, we may think it's exceptionally important, but 3 months from now, 3 weeks from now, 3 days from now, it may not be quite as important. It's a really important piece to remember, because when you can sort of help to right size something, whether the right sizing is how it looks to others, or what people are thinking about, or it's how we're catastrophizing, which we tend to do when we're younger. As we get older, we get better at seeing, not sweating the small stuff and seeing the big picture. Our brain is actually trained for that. We are better at being able to see and connect the dots and see the big picture. Whereas when we're young, we tend to be fast and focused, which is part of the reason we react more when we're young, because of the fact that our brain has blinders on. So it's just being able to see that and recognize that. And in terms of, whether other people care about you, the fact is the people who care the most about you really don't care how you perform in life. They just care and how you
care about you. Yeah.
Yeah. They care. They want you to show up. And that's a hard one. That continues to be a hard one for me. I grew up with two firstborn parents. I went to Stanford. I was totally in my father's footsteps, and only boy in the family, oldest child. And so I have to remind myself of that still every day. And I'm in the business of helping people with this. So
you and me both, brother. All right. Your chapter on mental life. Love this insight. You said we're moving out of the information age and into the intuition age. Tell us more about what you meant by that. And how do we, as I was reading, I'm thinking, this is the answer with all the AI concerns. Like, yes, you can look up the information, but what about the application? How about the wisdom tied into that? So just build that out for us a little bit again. We're moving out of the information age and into the intuition age. Love that.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 20 years, knowledge has become commoditized. Yes. Peter Drucker, the management theorist, came up with the term knowledge worker in 1959. No one had any idea what he was talking about. 20 years later, we had knowledge workers and knowledge management. And because we realized that computers were important. And in fact, he was right. Knowledge workers will rule the world, because 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world are tech companies, the ultimate knowledge worker workplace. But having said that, our phone and ChatGPT and Google, I mean, we knowledge is a commodity today. Yep. And so it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means, knowing how to access knowledge and what to do with it is really important. Yeah. And so that's still important, but it may be less important because of the scarcity value of wisdom and the scarcity value of human qualities that are different than AI qualities. So human qualities are empathy and discernment and ethics and pattern recognition of one's life experience, and creativity, and intuition being at the core of this. AI does not have intuition. AI is an amazing technology that is synthesizing all of the world's knowledge and giving you an answer. Some people might call it wisdom because it's synthesizing it, but I don't call it wisdom because it's synthesizing knowledge. Synthesizing knowledge is great, but it's not enough. The AI doesn't have, at this point, it doesn't have a life. It has historical knowledge. Intuition is something that may have a cosmic component to it, but it certainly has a pattern recognition inside of you. And so when you're actually tapping into your intuition, you're not necessarily, you may be tapping into the pattern recognition of your past, which is wisdom, but also something deeper, a sixth sense that comes from somewhere else. And that sixth sense is not part of what AI has to offer at this point. Whether it's AI can have a consciousness is a hotly debated topic. I'm not going to wade into those waters. That's above my pay grade. But what I will say is currently it does not have a consciousness at all. It is something that actually puts together knowledge in a package and synthesizes the world's knowledge in 1 second. And that's amazing. But that is not the same as intuition. Intuition, again, partly internal, your historical past, and partly something that's a sixth sense that maybe your soul and maybe something much bigger than you, and being a channel for something to come through you. That's what intuition is.
Yeah, good stuff. We talk about disappointment, or you talk about disappointment equals expectations minus reality. The math with that, pretty straightforward. You either lower your expectations or you elevate reality. You provide a trap warning not to wrap an expectation in entitlement. What do you mean by that?
So when you're feeling entitled, you feel justified to control what's going to happen. So it's not about hope. It's not even about expectation, although it can be. Expectation taken to an extreme as an entitlement. It's about believing that the world is fair and that you are justified this. And so when you get to a place in life where you think the world is fair and this is justified, it's like a math equation. And I got to tell you, life is not a math equation. All kinds of stuff happens for all kinds of reasons that will disappoint you, especially the more logical you are, because the things that are beyond logic or beyond control or purely luck or the opposite of luck are things that are going to mess with you. And so the more you expect to an extreme, the more potential you have for disappointment.
That makes sense. You talk in that same section about letting go of an identity, and we've talked a little bit about that, but can you dip your whole foot into that one again on how folks can start letting go of an identity, which is obviously tied to expectations. Once you have an identity, it's driving what you expect to happen through that identity.
The metaphor I like to use here is this idea of uniforms or raincoats or garments. And we have lots of identities. We're a father, we're a son, we are a CEO of a company, we are a PTA president, we are whatever we are. And we wear these roles and identities. And we wonder in midlife why we feel suffocated by wearing 7 different garments, and because there's so many roles and identities. And so the liberation of being able to say, okay, I'm getting rid of that identity, is once people get there, it's really helpful. The hard part is, it's like, trying to take a Band-Aid off, and it doesn't feel very good. The hairs get caught in it and it just, yeah. So part of the reason the MEA exists is because a lot of people need to take the Band-Aid off quickly and they can't do it by themselves. We have over 600 TQ transitional intelligence coaches that have been trained and certified that help people with this out there in the world. But we also have, all these people, facilitators and coaches who teach in workshops. Sometimes you need someone to help you take the Band-Aid off. And that Band-Aid is the identity. And it doesn't mean by actually taking it off, you can't put it back on again. It means what would it feel like?
That's good.
To take it off, see what that feels like, and then you can always put it on again. But maybe it's a bigger size. You know what? As we get old, as we get older, in our teen years, you have to wear a bigger pair of shoes, a bigger shirt, But if you're wearing a garment that you put on at age 15 around an identity, and at age 50, you're feeling a little cramped by it, it's not surprising. And again, we're talking metaphorically here, figuratively. And so sometimes you have to take it off and you may say, I want that same garment, but in a larger size. So I've got some wiggle room, so it's not a straitjacket.
I like that. One of our coaches likes to say it's a t-shirt, not a tattoo, when she's encouraging people to try something. And I think that's a wonderful visual. And that's what you're talking about. This is not permanent. This is next. And I think that realization is powerful. You use this phrase and it caught my attention, the portfolio life. And people know you don't put all your stock in one thing or your investment all in one thing. You spread that out across your portfolio. How does that play itself out in our lives, in the real world?
Well, um, so the portfolio life as a premise is the idea of having a portfolio, a multitude of things that
Yes.
you do. And the premise being no one thing can sink you. And it gives you a little bit more diversity in terms of what you want to do. Like I have a friend who has moved from having working for the same company and growing in the company for about 20 years. And now she's got this portfolio life. She teaches part-time at a local college. She's an Airbnb host and makes some money there. She's a photographer and has photography shows and makes a little bit of money doing that. And she consults. And so some people would not like that. It's like, oh my God, there's four different sources of income. But for her, she loves it because she can, when she's really excited about the photography, up the ante on that. Now, that's one that doesn't make a lot of money. So if she's going to say, I'm going to spend more time on that, my pie chart of photography is going to be bigger, the pie slice, then she needs to know, okay, well, then I better be making some Airbnb money on the side, because the thing that she likes about those two together, in fact, is the Airbnb doesn't take a lot of her time. It's just that she's making money on space. The problem with coaching and teaching is they both take time. Photography does take time as well. So, but like if she doubles down on something that is like, time is a finite, piece of information or
Resource.
it's a resource.
Yeah.
So she's realized over time that she loves her photography and that Airbnb hosting is actually maybe the best way for her to be able to have enough time to do the photography.
To bring those together. That makes sense. You mentioned relationships, and especially with men. You said that's a struggle area. It seems like one of the big struggles in midlife is shifting relationships, friendships, marriages. People move, family dynamics change. What have you learned about nurturing meaningful relationships during this key phase?
Number one variable on so many different research projects for living a longer, healthier, happier life is how invested are we in social wellness or our relationships in midlife and beyond. This is a wake-up call for men because women have usually kept their friendships better than men have. Men for all kinds of reasons, don't keep friendships like women do. And therefore, when you wake up in your 50s and your kids have moved out and you're starting to think about like, oh, okay, what am I going to do next? And maybe you're leaving a career. Men can see like this big gaping abyss that they don't know how to fill it. And their friendship muscle has atrophied. The key is to think of friendship as a practice. And my co-founder, Jeff of MEA, says friendship's a practice. And when you start to think of friendship as a practice, it's like playing golf. You practice golf, yoga, you practice yoga. When you start to think of it as a practice, you start to invest in it to get better at it. And that's there's a whole section in the book about that, but it's a really important piece of living a good life. And social wellness is, the word wellness starts with the letters we, and the word illness starts with the letter I. So it doesn't mean that, focusing on I will make you ill, but it does mean that it's a reminder that wellness doesn't have to be something that's purely your own personal wellness. It can be, how do you have social wellness, which means connection and community? And frankly, how can you integrate your physical wellness instead of going for a walk by yourself? How come, maybe once a week you have your best friend and you go for a walk with your dogs and do an hour-long vigorous walk? And maybe that's better than just listening on your iPod to another podcast. Nothing against podcasts.
Except for this one. Yeah. He didn't mean this one. Yeah. Let's step into the MEA. Really well received. I had no idea. 7,000 alums. That's awesome. It's been going for 7 years. What you've talked about some of the unique aspects, but what do you see as the differentiators, the things that make MEA unique among all the different options? You mentioned Richard Rohr's attended yours. They have programs actually there in New Mexico. I don't know how far from where you are, but there's so many options. We host a retreat for coaches. There's a lot of different things out there. What's worked? Because it's working. You're having an impact. It's awesome.
Well, I think the origin story was, I'm a hospitality guy. I've been running hotels and restaurants and spas for a long, long time. So I had that element of me, which I wanted to apply to retreat centers. And a lot of retreat centers are very Spartan and utilitarian. They're not very well run. They're not a Four Seasons kind of experience. Secondly, I was on the board of the Esalen Institute, one of the first personal growth retreat centers in the United States, opened in 1962. And I was on the board there for 10 years, taught there for many years. So I understood what a retreat center is. Thirdly is I've always been interested in wellness. I own the largest spa for 28 years now. I've owned the largest spa in San Francisco and have, focused on my own wellness. And so wellness has been important. And then fourthly, there was a curriculum that really came out of my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, that was my Airbnb story, that spoke to this idea that in midlife, there are a collection of things we need to learn that society is not teaching us. And it was those four things, first-class hospitality in a retreat center, sort of not doing it in a hotel. I mean, like you could say, let's do a workshop and we'll do it at the Four Seasons, but that's a different feeling than being in this 100%. Container, this crucible. So the combination of first class in a crucible with a wellness component that speaks to the body, mind, and spirit, and that is specific in its orientation and curriculum toward people 35 to 75, but particularly people 45 to 65. That's what makes it different. And there's really nothing else like it. It's the world's first midlife wisdom school. In the world that we're talking about, you have the retreat centers of the Eslins and Omegas and other places like that, but they often don't have a curriculum. So they're not really a school. They're more of just purely the retreat center. And then you have spas like Canyon Ranch and Miraval, which are really nice. Mm-hmm. They definitely have sort of the luxury piece. And they've got a little bit of an education piece, but it's very much focused on the physical body. It's not focused on life stages. We sort of combine all of that together. And so, it's a first of its kind, and we have 2 locations now because there's enough demand, and we do a lot of private groups. We have lots of coaching groups. We have coaching groups that come and do private retreats with us. They come in, especially at our Santa Fe location, they come and they'll do a 3 or 4 day retreat with their content and then our content combined. And so we don't just do public workshops. We do about over 100 public workshops a year. And then we do about 35 private retreats a year.
Very cool. Was there a tipping point or a transitional point within this? So you've been doing it 7 years where you realized, we need to add this, or we need to take this away, or we need to do you remember? And I'm sure 7 years, you always are making changes. But was there one big one where you go, oh, yeah, because you kind of smile when I said that. Was there one where you're like, oh, yeah, we had this one thing we needed to change?
COVID. We were open for 2 years before COVID came along. And when COVID came along with a campus in Mexico on the beach, I was like, well, the first few months of COVID, you just didn't know if people were going to travel internationally. Sure. Ultimately, Mexico became a place where a lot of people decamped to because it's an outdoor culture. But the reality is, it was at that point that we said, okay, we got to find a U.S. location, and that's why we decided to go to Santa Fe, and we bought this 4 square mile ranch, 2,600 acre ranch, and created a campus there too. So that was, I think, a major one. Going online was a major one as well. We were hearing people wanting it. I was resisting it. And then COVID came along. It's like, okay, got to do that. And that allowed us to have a much broader, 60 countries represented. Many of those countries can't make it to the people from those countries can't make it to one of our locations. And then we used to be we looked at doing a 2-week program, and then we kept a 7-day program, and now it's a 5-day program. And that's partly just because, the modern people, even 5 days for some people is like, oh, that's just too much of a commitment. It's like, yeah, I know. But if you want a transformation that's going to change the rest of your life, it's not going to happen in a weekend typically.
Right. Absolutely. I'm guessing some folks are listening to us and they're saying, yeah, but I'm good. Like they're anxious. They don't want to make the transition. Next year I'll dive into this, or, in 5 more years, can you give us some, I don't know, some mindset shifts or a first step or something practical to begin embracing this actual transition, and just instead of pushing it off to another year or decade or after this happens?
Yeah, change doesn't happen because of words. It happens because of actions. So hard to change your habits when you don't change your habitat. The value of going to a retreat is that it takes you out of your normal conditions, so that you can actually see things differently. And you're not like, people said to us, well, why not, Chip, you were in San Francisco for a long time, and why didn't you just create a retreat center in Sonoma? And I was like, well, yeah, I could have done that. And most people would have driven there. And it's like, and then after 24 hours, they're like, oh, I'm done with this. I'm not going to stay for the 5-day program. And so it's a bit of a pilgrimage. And part of the reason that we have such evangelical graduates is because we specialize in transformation, and you are not going to transform yourself by reading a book. Now, can that happen? Yes, it's rare. What you need is an intervention. And when I say an intervention, we're not a 12-step program. We're not a place where you're going to go and dry out. We're not a place, if you're thinking about suicide, that's not what we are. We are an intervention for people who are living normal lives who feel stuck. And when you're feeling stuck, you don't keep doing the same thing.
Great phrase, my friend. You asked the question, love this question, in what ways are you a beginner right now? How might you answer that question?
Well, I became a beginner at Spanish and surfing, as I said earlier. Yeah. But I'm a beginner right now being a dad. I have sons who are 13 and 10, and that, is a journey as they're moving into their
tough time. Yep.
Yeah. And so I'm a beginner at that. That you're constantly a beginner at that because they are aging into the next era. And then there's a whole new thing you need to learn. I am a beginner at becoming a podcaster. I'm doing this spring. I have resisted it for a long time, but I'm finally doing it. And so that's a beginner thing. I am a beginner at, I'm a beginner at learning to juggle, which is something.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm learning to juggle. It's good for your brain, and no one gets hurt in the process of you learning to juggle.
So no fires or swords at this point.
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. Because that could change the equation a little bit. I love it. All right. Your book was published in 24. If you were to add a chapter today, what would it cover? And why would you lean into that particular edition?
I talked earlier about the difference between men and women when it comes to midlife. I would have put a full chapter on that topic. I allude to it a little bit in a couple of the chapters, but I would have just dedicated a whole chapter to the differences between men and women. What I talked about earlier is invisibility versus irrelevance. The way women get very much more wrapped up around the idea of beauty getting lost. Men get worried about brawn being lost. But they're very different elements in terms of how women experience midlife than men. And I think I would have spent more time on that.
So with that in mind, within your retreats or within your events, do you separate the groups out? Do you have different paths?
We have women's workshops frequently. We are starting to do men's workshops. Men do not come to personal growth retreat centers as much as women. About 64% of our 7,000 alums are women. That doesn't mean men don't come. Men definitely come, but we wanted to make sure we've got enough momentum to make a men's week successful, and now we have that. So you'll see that on the calendar in 2026.
Okay, very good. Last question, however you want to phrase this, billboard, big message that goes out to the world, something powerful takeaway, something we haven't really talked about regarding aging, midlife, that would change the way they approach their future. What would that message be?
That message would be age fluid. Age fluid is a term I came up with that speaks to the idea that you are not defined by your chronological age. You're all the ages you will have ever been and will ever be. And at times you can act like a 75-year-old, and at other times you can act like a 15-year-old. And that is perfectly fine. You don't have to act your age.
And with that, within your retreats, or maybe it's a separate course or something you do on the wellness side, because I know this is important to you personally, we can shift our algorithm. So the data says we lose that 1% a year after age 40, physical, et cetera, et cetera. But that's on average. Just like we talked about health span versus lifespan. Do you address, either personally or through your retreats, the fact that that's not a given? That's the broader data when we take the entire population. It is not you. You are an N of one. You can shift that. You can't stop it. We can't stop aging, but we can shift that 1% to 1/3%. And over 20 or 30 years, that's a big deal. Do you touch on that, or is that really not a focus area?
I mean, obviously, lifestyle choices, as I said earlier, have a big impact on whether you'll get to 90 and how well you'll get to 90, your health span.
Yes.
But I think the other thing we actually really help people with is realizing that the key to looking at aging is not to get obsessed with the physical side of it, because there's a bunch of things that get better with age. Your emotional intelligence, your wisdom, your ability to understand who you are, your spiritual curiosity. So we get fixated on the body, the playing field of the body. And when in fact, there's many playing fields. And in most of those playing fields, as we get older, we get better at these other things.
Yeah. And that ties into your be age fluid. I love that. Chip, so appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing. Yeah. This is so important. It is so needed, as you are demonstrating with the supply and demand you're seeing. But well done, my friend. Keep up the great work. And thanks for joining us here on the Coaching Lab podcast.
Yeah, it's an honor. I have a ton of respect for coaches, so I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us for this latest episode of the Coaching Lab podcast. We have been working on this interview for months. I think we scheduled this one 6 months in advance. So really excited to see it come to fruition. I hope it was helpful to you. Again, we will have links to Chip's books. We'll have links to the article series that I've written on unlocking the second half of life, both in the show notes, so you can access those if you'd like to. And again, if we can help you on your path through life, if you're thinking about becoming a coach, life coach, health and wellness coach, performance coach, Catalyst might be worth a look. It's catalystcoachinginstitute.com. You got a lot of good options out there, so we may not be the best fit for you, but we're happy to talk it through and look at some of those details and answer the questions you've got. We were very, very fortunate, happy, thrilled to be named the #1 coach certification program by Fortune magazine and the most customizable by Forbes. So those are a couple of outside resources that gave us that designation, and we're honored to have that. So that might be something that nudges us onto your list if we were not prior. But in any case, all the best. Thank you for joining us here on the Coaching Lab podcast, and I will speak with you soon on the next episode of the Coaching Lab podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.